Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of planting shrubs. I'm going to plant this sunshine ligustrum in this space right here. I'm going to go over the basic tools real quick. You don't need a whole lot when you're planting a shrub, hopefully. You don't need a whole lot. I've got a pick mattock right here. One end of this has a pick, and the other end is a mattock right here. The mattock end would be for cutting roots. The pick is good if you have really hard soil for you can slam that pick down in the ground and just pull back on it. I really don't need to use a pick mattock in my soil here, but it is a good tool to have if you have a hard time digging in your soil. I also use a trenching shovel, which I've showed many times on my channel. It's just a narrower shovel. It's much easier to sink this shovel in the ground than a regular full-size shovel. I think if you used the two on the same day, you recognize the difference very, very quickly. It takes a few more scoops to dig a hole, but it's an easier effort. And you really do need a garden rake if you're going to be doing any planting. I've got a mulch space here already, and I need to pull this mulch back. If you have a grassed area, you want to get rid of the grass. This is already already a bed here. I don't want any of this existing mulch. Hardwood mulch to fall into this hole. It will steal nitrogen from my plant. It would be fine if it was broken down a little bit more, but it's very, very fresh, and if it ends up down in the soil, it is going to potentially use some nitrogen, take it away from my plant, and yellow, off color my plants. But I'll go in here and make sure I use this rake and get down right down to the soil level. I actually have already put a layer of compost below this mulch when I was prepping this area, and so I don't even need to amend the soil, but I'll show you what I would amend the soil with if I had not done that. So I'm down to the bare dirt here. I've got the two things that I primarily use. I have a clay-based soil in my yard, and if you can find pine bark soil conditioner. This is just a ground up pine bark that's been aged for a little while. It's great for mixing into clay-based soils and creating some drainage. When you pull your plants out of their containers, frequently you'll see they're actually grown in that same material. So most growers in the country use that fine pine bark to grow their plants. The other thing that I'll use in any soil type really would be compost. And I have laid down almost an inch of compost on this ground before I actually mulched it. And so that's going to end up mixed into the ground. But you could use any kind of compost. Cow manure, wouldn't go too crazy with cow manure. Sometimes it can have a nitrogen component, and we may end up burning our plants. But a shovelful would be very helpful. And then, or pine bark. Or alternatively, nothing. I'd rather you not use the wrong thing. You're better off using nothing than the wrong thing. That's what I mean to say there. But pine bark soil conditioner, if you have clay-based soils and you can find it, compost in either clay or sand will definitely help improve the soil. Or nothing. I don't recommend any of the soil mixes or planting mixes that have fertilizer in them. If you're planting in the spring, they would be okay. But if you're planting in the fall, we don't want to be fertilizing. So it's kind of weird to me that we would have the fertilizer mixed in. So you really want to fertilize when it's time to fertilize and not necessarily the day you're planting. So I'll get started digging this hole. And this is in a 2-gallon container here. That container is probably about 10 inches wide. I go about twice the width of the container, but I don't worry too much about the depth. The roots aren't going to really root down very deep in this clay-based soil here. So I'm digging about the depth of the root ball here, and about twice the width. And so, like I say, this soil here, it is clay, and I'll show it to you here, but it's just not bad at all, right there. So it is a red clay, but it has some organic matter mixed into it, and it's not bad. And it's fairly easy to dig in. As you can see how I was able to sink this shovel down there the first time. So I have the hole, what looks like about twice as wide as the container, and I can actually kind of test fit it while it's still in the container. And I think that's going to be about right there. I'm ultimately going to leave this root ball up a little bit, and so I think that's just about perfect right there. when I pull the plant out of the container, and there's a lot of different things to know here when you pull a plant out of a container. Sometimes they don't want to, sometimes they don't. I've already pulled this one out, so it's coming out easy, but sometimes they're not going to want to come out. And you can bang on the side of it like this and loosen it up that way. The best way to actually remove the container though is to flip the container upside down in your hand like this and pull the container off over your head and support the plant by the root ball. Don't support the plant by the top of the plant because you will break them off. There's some things that are, this sunshine ligustrum wouldn't have a problem with me grabbing it from the top, but there are a lot of plants that if you support that root ball by the weight of the top of the plant, you will break them off, and I've done it, okay? So the next thing we're gonna look at is how root bound is the plant. And you can see how these roots are matted down. I picked this ligustrum because I knew they're super aggressive in a container, and we'll have to do a little bit of work on these roots. Sometimes you're gonna pull up a plant out of the container and soil is actually just gonna be falling off of it, and you're not gonna have to do anything to the roots. Sometimes you're gonna pull them out and they're gonna be extremely matted. I have a folding saw that I use right here. This is a Corona folding saw, which I find handy for a lot of different tasks in the garden. And I actually will just go from the top to the bottom on this root ball several times, just like this, and cut into it just like that. One thing you want to make sure is this plant is moist, and I did water it beforehand. You don't want to be planting dry plants. It's kind of difficult to re-wet that root ball once they're in the ground. But just like this, if you have a really matted bottom like this one does, like you can see right there, I actually will take that completely off. It's not, you don't get that very often, but if you do, I'll take this saw and just take that piece completely off, just like that. I'll show it to you when I get it cut off, just like this. This will seem kind of mean, but that's going to be the plant's going to be much better off without having those matted roots. And now let me show you what I've accomplished here. By cutting that bottom off, all of these roots are ready to now spread outward. You can see that. I don't have any wrapping roots going around this root ball anymore. And that's adequate. I'm going to set them down in this hole. Let me remove these pots. Like I say, I don't need any of these amendments today because I have compost here already that's getting mixed in. I use my shovel in this situation to lay right across here. And this shovel is sticking up above the original grade about 2 inches. That's where I want the top of my root ball for my shrub here. So I want to align the top of that root ball with the top of that edge of that shovel. And so I need to put some soil back into this hole and raise it up a little bit. Again, I'm only picking up the top of this plant because I do know this ligustrum is hardy enough to take it. Normally I would reach down in there and pick it up by the root ball. Okay, all right. So now I'm gonna lay my shovel back across here again. Now they're perfectly even right here. That's right where I want it. So ultimately, when I pack the soil back around this plant, it's gonna be sticking up above the grade, 1 to 2 inches. And plant it high and it won't die. That keeps us from overwatering them. It also keeps us from over mulching them. So when I put this mulch back around this plant, it'd be super easy if the plant was planted deep to bury it in mulch. So I'm breaking up these soil clumps as I go, and that's incorporating this compost in that I already had here on the ground. You can see this is about what it ends up looking like right there. The compost that I had there. So it's probably about a 50-50 blend of compost in that soil from the that I pulled out of the hole. So again, I'm just gonna break these up and just pull it in slowly, and then I'll pack around with my feet. I don't go too crazy doing this. I don't want to get all the air out of it, but I do want to firm it in all the way around like that. And again, I'm being careful not to knock a lot of this mulch into the ground, into the planting hole. Just like that. Okay, so I think you can see here that even after I have this thing planted, we have part of the root ball still sticking up above the grade right here. That's exactly what I'm going for. So there's just a couple more steps to go. First one would be mulching, and I already had my existing mulch here, so I'm just going to pull it back around the plant like this. You definitely, you really don't want your shrubs growing in your grass, and so you need to create some space around them where they have their own root space, and mulch does a good job of suppressing weeds and holding in moisture and regulating temperature in the summer and in the winter, and just tons of benefits. So a good layer of mulch is a good idea for your shrubs. And like I say, I already had it here. You can use hardwood mulch. You can use pine bark mini nuggets or pine straw. You can use wood chips. You can use all kinds of things. The main thing here is we want, I would say 3 inches is probably about the right amount. And then after we rake it back around the plant, we want to go back and make sure that we didn't just pile anything up around the base of the plant. We don't want to bury any part of this plant that wasn't buried in that container. So don't end up with the mulch riding up your plants over time. And then one other thing, if I'm planting this in February, and so it's not going to be using a lot of water. It's not doing a lot of growing, not doing any growing. If I was planting this later in the spring or summer, I might do a little bit of pruning on this plant. I might take about 1 inch off the end of all of these branches, just to compensate for that root damage that I did. You saw how almost mean I was to those roots. So I've reduced the amount of roots on this plant. Reducing the size of the top of the plant can be beneficial to kind of balancing out the root mass to the top of the plant. Like I say, I'm planting this in February, so I'm not concerned about it. Late spring, summer planting, I would have probably taken 1 inch off the top of this plant just to stop the growth on it. So the last step is watering your shrub in well, and we want to not just water the center of the plant. Don't just hold it right over the center of the plant like that. Let's water thoroughly the entire area around the shrub. If you have dry soil out here, that dry soil is just going to wick the water away from your plant. So if you water right here in the middle and don't get this out here wet, it's going to very quickly, the soil is going to balance that water, and it's just going to take it away from your plant. So like I say, water the entire area very thoroughly. In the next, tomorrow, I'll come back over here, dig down about 1 inch around this plant, and if it's dried out, I'm going to water it again, just exactly like I'm doing. If it's not, I'm going to skip another day, and then ultimately find the pattern of how long it's taking this plant to dry out, and water it accordingly. Everybody's watering schedule is going to be different. You have different soil types. If you have a sandier, well-draining soil, you're probably going to have to water very frequently when you first plant the plant. I have this clay-based soil, and the amount of water that I'm putting here right now is going to last several days for sure. If you find that your plants are wilting in the afternoon, but the soil is moist, that means what I said, where the roots have been damaged enough where they can't get enough water up into the top of the plant. You may want to prune the top of your plant just a little bit. Just take about 1 inch off the end of each branch. That's all that takes. But again, I've saturated this entire space very, very thoroughly. So when you're spring planting your shrubs, you could definitely go ahead and fertilize them at the same time you're planting them. Any kind of slow release fertilizer will work. The rest of the year, I probably would hold off on fertilizing. If you want to, you can use some sort of starter fertilizer, something without nitrogen in it, just something, starter fertilizer for shrubs and trees. Anything like that would be fine if you wanted to do that. But spring would be the only time I would use a regular general fertilizer that'll push new growth on them. We don't want to be pushing growth on them in the fall or winter because they could be damaged. But it's pretty quick and easy. Pull back the mulch, plant it high so it doesn't die, water it in thoroughly, figure out the schedule for your watering. You really only need a really basic set of tools. I definitely recommend a Pickmatic. I definitely recommend buying a trenching shovel, especially if you're new to gardening. It's just much easier to use. The garden rake is great at cleaning out existing mulch and grass and that kind of thing. The Matic will work to help you get the grass out as well. And so it's a really basic set of tools. I use that folding saw, that Corona folding saw. I've had one of those in my pocket for a long, long time. It's great for pruning and for all kinds of tasks. And you saw what I did to the roots on that. And then basic planting materials, just think basic: compost, cow manure, pine bark soil conditioner if you can find it. Those are the perfect things to use. They're inexpensive so super easy. Main thing is I planted it high. I can tell you that most of the things I see die when people return things. When I had my garden center and stuff, you could see that they had put soil up on the wood, up on the beyond, what I would call the top of the root ball being your shoulders. They had put soil and mulch, up onto the collar and further up onto the plant, and then ultimately ended up drowning them. So thank you very much for watching this video.